Michael Chen had always lived modestly despite his success. After selling his tech startup for a substantial sum, he could have purchased a mansion in any exclusive neighborhood, but instead chose a modest home in Oak Ridge Estates. The quiet suburban community was perfect for his needs, close enough to the city for convenience, but peaceful enough for him to work on his next venture. He purposely kept a low profile. His neighbors saw him as just another resident, the quiet guy who sometimes worked late in his garage and always remembered to bring in his trash cans promptly. What they didn't know was that Michael had quietly purchased the entire development through a holding company when the original developer faced bankruptcy 5 years ago. He maintained the same HOA structure, but remained a silent owner, wanting to experience the neighborhood as a regular resident. Michael's 3-bedroom ranch-style home sat at the end of Maple Drive, distinguished only by the Japanese maple in the front yard and the carefully tended vegetable garden in the back. On weekends, residents would see him tinkering with gadgets in his open garage or taking evening walks around the community lake. He greeted everyone with a genuine smile, but rarely engaged in neighborhood gossip. The decision to buy Oak Ridge Estates wasn't merely a whim. When Michael learned the development was facing foreclosure, he remembered his own childhood in a similar community that had deteriorated when purchased by an indifferent corporate landlord. His parents had lost their life savings in that housing collapse, and Michael vowed no family in Oak Ridge would suffer the same fate. Through Cedar Heights LLC, named after the street where he grew up, Michael maintained the property values while keeping HOA fees reasonable. He hired a management company to handle day-to-day operations and attended board meetings only via his attorney, who held proxy voting rights. The arrangement worked perfectly for 3 years. Michael's home office, converted from the 3rd bedroom, overlooked the community park where children played every afternoon. It was there he developed the prototype for his new sustainable energy project. The contrast between his outward appearance and his financial reality amused him. His 10-year-old Honda sat in the driveway, while the documents for his recent acquisition of a renewable energy patent lay on his IKEA desk. The only person who knew his secret was his sister May, who visited monthly from Seattle. "You're living like a monk while sitting on millions," she teased during her last visit. "At least upgrade your coffee maker." Michael had laughed. "The point isn't to live below my means. It's to remember what matters. Besides, this neighborhood has everything I need: good people, quiet streets, and no pretension." He couldn't have known how quickly that peaceful existence would be disrupted by one new resident with a clipboard and an inflated sense of authority. Karen Whitfield moved into Oak Ridge Estates 4 months ago and immediately campaigned for a position on the HOA board. With her perfectly highlighted hair and permanent disapproving expression, she quickly became known for her clipboard inspections and barrage of violation notices. Other residents began avoiding her, but Karen seemed to thrive on the power her HOA position gave her. 2 weeks after securing her role as HOA enforcement chair, Karen set her sights on Michael's home. His modest landscaping didn't match her vision for the neighborhood, and the occasional delivery van for his work projects violated her interpretation of the no commercial vehicles rule. The fact that he never attended HOA meetings particularly irritated her. She began documenting every perceived infraction with meticulous detail. Karen's 4,000-square-foot colonial-style home stood in stark contrast to Michael's modest ranch. She had insisted on extensive renovations before moving in, installing a fountain in the front yard that ran until 11 p.m., and landscape lighting that neighbors complained illuminated their bedrooms. Somehow, these additions never violated any HOA guidelines. despite the light and noise ordinances clearly stated in Section 5 of the community bylaws. Before Oakridge Estates, Karen had lived in 3 other planned communities in 5 years. What residents didn't know was that she had left each one amid controversy, usually after attempting to remake the neighbourhood in her image and encountering resistance. Her LinkedIn profile proudly listed her HOA experience as Community Standards Consultant, though no one had ever hired her in that capacity. "Someone needs to speak to Mr. Chen about that eyesore he calls a garden," Karen announced at her second board meeting. Vegetables belong in grocery stores, not front-facing properties. It decreases curb appeal. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. Michael's garden was actually in his backyard, and many residents appreciated his occasional gifts of fresh tomatoes and peppers. "The guidelines don't prohibit gardens," offered Tom Wilson, the board treasurer. "Besides, it's not visible from the street." Karen's smile tightened. "Perhaps we should update our guidelines then. I've prepared a draft of proposed changes." She pulled out a 30-page document that would have effectively required every home to conform to her aesthetic preferences. As Karen conducted her daily inspection walks, smartphone in hand to document violations, she noted with particular irritation the increasing number of delivery trucks at Michael's home. What she interpreted as Amazon addiction was actually component deliveries like his sustainable energy prototype, but Karen wasn't interested in explanations. She began leaving printed violation notices on his door, first weekly, then daily. When Michael called the management company to inquire about these notices, the property manager seemed confused. Many of Karen's citations referenced rules that didn't exist or were misinterpreted, but Karen had copied the HOA's letterhead perfectly, giving her notices an official appearance that concerned Michael more than he let on. On a sunny Saturday morning, Michael was tinkering with a prototype in his garage when a sharp knock interrupted his concentration. Opening the door, he found Karen clutching her clipboard, a stack of violation notices, and a smug smile. "Mr. Chen, I've documented 17 violations of HOA regulations on your property in the past month alone," she announced without introduction. "The board has authorized me to inform you that if these aren't addressed within 10 days, we'll begin eviction proceedings." Michael tried reasoning with her, explaining that several of her violations weren't actually in the HOA guidelines. Karen wasn't interested in discussion. She thrust the papers at him and turned to leave with a parting shot. "Perhaps you should actually read the community regulations before deciding to live here." Michael stood in his doorway, flipping through the extensive packet. Among the violations were claims that his Japanese maple was an unapproved species. It had been there when he bought the house. That his mailbox was 2 inches too far from the curb. It hadn't moved in 5 years. And that the excessive deliveries constituted running a business from home. The final page stopped him cold. It wasn't a violation notice, but a formal letter, on counterfeit HOA letterhead, stating that the board had voted unanimously to begin eviction proceedings. Michael knew this was impossible. His lawyer would have informed him of any such meeting or vote. "Ms. Whitfield," he called, catching her before she reached her BMW. Karen turned, lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes." "I don't believe the board has authorized these actions. In fact, I'm certain they haven't." Michael kept his voice measured despite his growing concern about her tactics. Karen's eyebrow arched. "Oh, and how would you know? You've never attended a single meeting." "I keep in touch with the management company," Michael replied. "This letter claims an unanimous board vote that never happened." For a moment, uncertainty flashed across Karen's face, but she recovered quickly. Tom Wilson signed off on it yesterday. Perhaps you should take it up with him if you have concerns." She turned and walked briskly to her car. Michael watched her leave, then pulled out his phone. A quick call to Tom confirmed his suspicions. There had been no meeting, no vote, and certainly no authorization for eviction proceedings. Tom sounded alarmed when Michael described the falsified letter. Later that afternoon, Michael's doorbell rang again. This time it was Elaine Rodriguez from 3 doors down, clutching a similar packet of violations. "I don't understand," the retired teacher said, voice wavering. "I've lived here for 12 years without issues. Now she claims my bird feeder violates Section 8.3 and my flowers are unapproved plantings. She says I have to remove everything or face fines of $100 per day." As they compared notes, Michael's phone buzzed with texts from 2 other neighbours, all reporting similar confrontations with Karen that day. A pattern was emerging, and it was more troubling than mere power tripping. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She appeared to be fabricating them, along with the authority to implement them. Rather than immediately revealing his ownership, Michael decided to investigate Karen's actions throughout the neighbourhood. He spoke with other residents and discovered a pattern of selective enforcement and personal vendettas. Karen had been targeting anyone who disagreed with her or whom she considered not up to community standards. The final straw came when Michael learned she had reduced an elderly resident to tears over a bird feeder that had been in place for a decade before Karen arrived. When he checked the HOA financial records through his management company, he discovered Karen had been pushing for expensive renovations with a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. Over the next 3 days, Michael methodically built his case. He requested all meeting minutes, financial records, and architectural review decisions from the past 4 months. His property manager, Sophia Williams, was puzzled by the sudden interest, but provided everything promptly. "There's something else you should know," Sophia said during their video call. "Ms. Whitfield has been pressuring me to approve vendor changes without board review. When I refused, she threatened to have the management contract terminated." The documents revealed disturbing patterns. Karen had been recording emergency approvals for expenses that never went before the board. 3 new vendors shared the same business address as her previous home, and all had been awarded contracts without competitive bids. Most concerning was a $127,000 proposal for community landscape enhancement to be performed by Platinum Exteriors LLC, a company formed just 2 months ago by Karen's brother-in-law, Eric Whitfield. Michael's neighbour, Elaine Rodriguez, introduced him to Gerald Thompson, the 78-year-old whose bird feeder had drawn Karen's wrath. Gerald's hands trembled as he showed Michael a fine notice for $750. "My late wife put that feeder up 15 years ago," Gerald explained, voice breaking. "The birds were her joy. This lady says it's an attractive nuisance and violates some rule about feeding wildlife. When I asked to see the rule, she said it was a recent amendment not yet published." Using a secure online form, Michael created a neighbourhood survey about recent HOA experiences. 27 households responded, more than half the community. The results were illuminating. 17 had received violation notices, all after disagreeing with Karen at meetings or declining to support her initiatives. 9 reported feeling intimidated, and 5 elderly residents had paid fines for violations that didn't exist in the bylaws. Michael consulted discreetly with his attorney, Emma Castillo, who reviewed the evidence with growing concern. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," Emma said, tapping the falsified eviction notice. "This is fraud and misrepresentation. She's forging documents and misappropriating funds. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Michael considered his options. He could file complaints with state authorities, pursue legal action against Karen personally, or simply exercise his ownership rights to remove her from the board. But each approach had consequences for the community he tried to protect. The neighbours didn't need a drawn-out legal battle that would divide them further. "I think," Michael said finally, "it's time for me to attend an HOA meeting." The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community centre. Attendance was typically sparse, but this time Michael made sure to arrive early. Karen was at the front, arranging her materials and looking pleased as she prepared to announce her new slate of enforcement actions. When it came time for public comments, Michael stood up. Karen immediately tried to cut him off, citing his unresolved violations, but he continued anyway. "Before we proceed, I think it's important to clarify something about the ownership of Oak Ridge Estates," he began calmly. Karen interrupted again. "Mr. Chen, your property violations don't give you the right to waste everyone's time." "Actually," Michael replied, sliding a document folder across the table, "as the owner of Oak Ridge Management LLC, which holds the deed to the entire development, I believe I have some say in how things are run." The room fell silent. Karen's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and horror as she flipped through the property deeds and corporate registration documents. The community centre's meeting room was unusually crowded that evening. Word had spread about the confrontations, and residents filled every chair, with some standing against the walls. Michael entered quietly, nodding to neighbours who had shared their stories with him. Karen sat at the head table with two other board members, Tom Wilson and Marie Galvez. The agenda in front of her listed enforcement actions and landscape renovation approval as the main items. Michael noticed the absence of proper meeting minutes or financial statements, standard requirements for HOA meetings. "I call this meeting to order," Karen announced precisely at 7:00 p.m., tapping her gavel with unnecessary force. "First, I'd like to announce that we've secured a fantastic bid for community landscaping improvements. The proposal from Platinum Exteriors will transform our common areas with new plantings and—" "Excuse me," Tom interrupted. "Shouldn't we approve the minutes from last month and review the financial statements first?" Karen's smile tightened. "We can address those administrative matters later. The landscape project has a time-sensitive discount we need to lock in tonight." From the back of the room, Gerald Thompson raised his hand. "I'd like to discuss these violation notices many of us have received. Some seem to reference rules that aren't in our bylaws." "Mr. Thompson, we have a full agenda tonight," Karen replied dismissively. "Individual violations should be addressed in writing to the board, not at open meetings." Several residents murmured in disagreement. Michael watched as Karen attempted to steamroll over their concerns, noting how she deflected every question about documentation or procedure. When she announced they would vote immediately on the $127,000 landscaping contract, Michael finally stood. "Point of order," he said clearly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Chen, you have multiple unresolved violations. You're not in good standing and cannot speak at this meeting." "I believe I am in good standing," Michael replied, walking toward the front with his briefcase. "And I have some relevant information before this vote proceeds." "This is outrageous," Karen snapped, banging her gavel. "If you don't sit down, I'll have you removed." Michael placed his folder on the table and opened it deliberately. "Before anyone considers removal, I need to clarify my relationship to Oak Ridge Estates." He slid the property records across to Tom and Marie. Cedar Heights LLC is the legal owner of this entire development. I am the sole owner of Cedar Heights LLC. The room erupted in whispers as Karen snatched the documents. Her face paled as she scanned the county records, property deeds, and corporate filings, all notarized and certified. In the aftermath of the revelation, Michael instituted several changes. The HOA board was restructured with term limits and checks on enforcement powers. Karen's brother-in-law's contracts were cancelled after a proper bidding process revealed their inflated prices. As for Karen, she put her house on the market within a week. Before she left, Michael made a point to visit her. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the HOA was meant to maintain the neighbourhood, not to be a tool for control or profit. The best communities are built on mutual respect." Karen didn't respond, but her expression spoke volumes as she signed the closing papers, selling her home back to Michael's company at a fair but not generous price. After she departed, Michael established a new neighbourhood council focused on community building rather than rule enforcement. The bird feeders returned, residents began greeting each other again, and Oak Ridge Estates became known as one of the most desirable and friendly neighbourhoods in the area, a place where the rules existed to serve the residents, not the other way around. The community centre buzzed with conversation after Karen stormed out of the meeting. Residents approached Michael with a mix of confusion, relief, and curiosity. "Why didn't you tell us?" asked Elaine Rodriguez. "All this time, we thought you were just another neighbour." Michael smiled. "Because that's exactly what I wanted to be. The best way to understand a community is to live in it as a regular resident, not as the owner." In the days that followed, Michael worked with his attorney to implement systematic changes. First, he returned all improperly collected fines to residents, with interest. Gerald Thompson's bird feeder was officially grandfathered into the bylaws, along with a clause protecting reasonable personal expressions in private yards. The HOA board was dissolved and reconstituted with clear limitations. The new governing documents required transparent financial reporting, recorded meetings, and a supermajority vote for any rule changes or major expenditures. Most importantly, enforcement powers were distributed among multiple members, with an appeals process for every citation. Karen's real estate agent called Michael's office 3 times before he agreed to meet. "Ms. Whitfield is having difficulty selling her home," the agent explained uncomfortably. "Given the situation, buyers are hesitant. Cedar Heights LLC will purchase it at market value," Michael replied after consideration. "Minus the costs of removing that fountain, which violates our noise ordinance." 2 days before closing, Michael visited Karen's nearly empty house. She answered the door with visible reluctance. "I could have pursued fraud charges," Michael said without preamble. "The falsified documents, the unauthorized fines, the kickbacks from vendors, there's enough evidence for criminal prosecution." Karen's shoulders tensed, but her expression remained defiant. "Yet here you are, buying my house instead. Should I be grateful for your generosity?" "Not generosity. Pragmatism," Michael corrected. "Legal battles destroy communities. They create divisions that last for years. I bought this neighbourhood to preserve it, not to tear it apart with lawsuits." As he turned to leave, Karen called after him. "Why did you do it? Buy an entire development just to live like an ordinary person." Michael paused. "Because extraordinary wealth doesn't exempt me from being a good neighbour. And because communities matter, they're not just investment properties or power trips. They're homes." 6 months later, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed. The community garden expanded onto a previously unused common area, with residents sharing vegetables and gardening tips. Monthly potluck dinners replaced formal HOA meetings, though a resident council still handled necessary maintenance decisions. Gerald Thompson's bird feeder became so popular that the community installed similar ones throughout the common areas, creating a haven for local wildlife. Michael remained in his modest ranch house, still working on his sustainable energy prototypes. But now neighbours dropped by regularly, offering suggestions, sharing meals, or just enjoying conversation. The community have found its balance, a place where rules served people, not the other way around.